Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Lana Zak. The jury has begun deliberations in Donald Trump's criminal trial out of New York. The judge gave the jury instructions this morning, and both sides presented their closing arguments yesterday. The defense attempted to poke holes in Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen's testimonies, and the prosecution asked the jury to focus on the documents that corroborate Cohen's account. We have team coverage of this case for you. Robert Costa and Errol Barnett have been at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa is the first person we're going to start with right now. Robert, bring people up to speed, because a lot of people have been deeply focused on this trial, and others are now maybe tuning in seriously for the first time. What were some of those closing arguments, and what has the judge said in terms of those instructions?
Good to be with you. The jury is now deliberating at the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse just behind me, and they are considering the reams of evidence they've seen over the past few weeks, along with the testimony they've heard inside the courtroom, and they have a decision to make. Will they find former President Donald Trump guilty of falsifying business records with the intent of somehow helping or saving his campaign back in 2016? And for those who are just tuning in, it ultimately comes down to criminal intent. Does the jury believe Michael Cohen, in particular, the key witness in this case, the former fixer and lawyer for Trump, who alleges that Trump directly participated in a scheme to cover up these payments to the adult film star Stormy Daniels and list them as so-called legal expenses and not file them in a proper way? Because of Cohen's testimony, Trump is really on the line right now here in New York, facing a possible prison sentence should he be found guilty.
All right. I want to head over now to Errol, who's also been covering this for us. So, Errol, remind us of the severity of the charges.
Well, Lana, we're talking about 34 felony counts. These are Class E felonies in New York, which are at the lowest category, but they do carry with them a $5,000 fine and potential prison time. But because Donald Trump, if found guilty, would be, someone without a criminal background, first-time offense, he is older, prison time is unlikely. But for right now, his entire fate, the fate of a former president and the fate of the presumptive GOP nominee is in the hands of 12 so-called regular New Yorkers. In the eyes of the law, they are Donald Trump's peers. These are 7 men and 5 women who got jury duty, as many of our viewers will have received in their lifetime, and realized that they would be at the center of an historic case, the first criminal prosecution of a former president. And now each of those jurors, who come from various professional backgrounds, ranging from 2 actual attorneys, but also a former investment banker, a teacher, a software engineer, a speech therapist, a physical therapist, they're now in a room together across a table, presumably for the first time, where they get to discuss openly their opinions, their views on the case. And it does come down to their opinions, their perspective of common sense, their perspective of intent. When Judge Merchant set out the foundation for them this morning, he basically reminded them of the fundamental principles of law, which is that there is a presumption of innocence on behalf of Donald Trump, that the burden of proof lies on the prosecution, and the prosecution, all the proof, the evidence, the testimony that they've brought forward has to go beyond what these jurors consider reasonable doubt. So each of these 12 people has to have been convinced during this trial that Donald Trump falsified the business records and these repayment checks to Michael Cohen, and he did so in pursuit of the White House, knowing that the Stormy Daniels allegation and others would be damaging to his chances. It's all about what these 12 people think and feel based on their experiences and based on what they understand as common sense. And Lana, these are jurors who also witnessed at the beginning of this trial, jurors get wilted down from the hundreds. If you remember, there was such a frenzy initially to identify who these jurors might be and what their political leanings were that some of them dropped out. some of them buckled under the media spotlight and the pressure of being involved in such a massive case. So these 12 jurors and the alternates who are standing by are the ones who wanted to stick this out and for more than 5 weeks have done so and listened to the testimony and have reviewed evidence. It truly is remarkable, but it both is and is not remarkable, and that it's something that happens every single day all across the country. But certainly there has never been more attention on 12 jurors in the country, likely in recent memory, than there are on these 12 now.
And as you point out, Errol, so interesting that right now those 12 are discussing this case for the very first time. I'm going to head back over to Robert, because as they are talking, the rest of the political world has been talking as well. And on that note, Trump has had many members of the GOP there physically supporting him, offering their presence in solidarity, if you will. We also have been hearing from the former president himself. So talk to us a bit about the politics, how he's being perceived within the party as the jurors are now talking for the very first time about these charges against him.
There was a strange American political scene that unfolded here yesterday that captured the political dynamics at play here in the country, but especially here in this microcosm of Lower Manhattan. Robert De Niro, the Academy Award-winning actor, held a press conference alongside the Biden campaign spokesman, Michael Tyler. And then you had Jason Miller and Stephen Chung, two top advisors to Trump, standing just steps away watching it all unfold. It's very rare for these two campaigns ahead of the general election debates to have any kind of interaction. And here they were in Lower Manhattan having that exchange, at least watching each other as this kind of surreal political and legal episode plays out. But this really captures what's going on here. Politically, the Republicans know that Trump is the presumptive nominee, but despite what happens here, and even if it's a conviction, there's no sign that Republicans are going to back away from Trump as their nominee. The Speaker of the House has come here to show solidarity, and that's a sign that across the party ranks, from the leadership to the rank and file, they stand with Trump. Whereas President Biden, he wants to really shine more of a light on Trump's conduct in the coming weeks, I'm told by sources close to him. He wants to bring the issue of American democracy to the fore as well. So you can expect to hear more from Democrats about Trump, his issues, legally and politically and democratically, in their view, in the coming months.
And you can hear some of that, let's say, passion even behind you right now, Robert, with some of the protesters that have gathered outside of the courthouse. I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson for additional legal analysis. She's, of course, a professor at Loyola Law School. So, Jessica, let's talk about stacking, because the way that these charges have been presented by the prosecution is really essential to their case that these are felony counts. Discuss for our viewers the intricacies of that and why that's going to be a really important question to these jurors who are evaluating these charges now.
Yes, and I think this doesn't feel like the typical case, because what we might see here is misdemeanor plus misdemeanor equals felony. And let's talk about what I mean by that. Typically, the falsification of business records, meaning you lied when it comes to invoices or ledgers, and you knew that you were lying, you had an intent to defraud, typically that alone is a misdemeanor. I know. So how in New York do you kick that up to a felony? You do so by showing you lied on the business records in order to try and commit or conceal another crime. Now, what is that other crime? To get to your question about stacking, here what the prosecution has really done is point to a state code that talks about unlawful election interference. Then they have to stack on top of that, filling in the meaning of the word unlawful. And so how are they doing that here? They're pointing potentially to campaign finance violations, to tax violations, and to other falsification of business records. They don't have to convict on those other crimes. Let's remember, they don't have to get a conviction for campaign finance. They don't have to get a conviction for tax fraud. So what they're doing is the business records were falsified to commit or conceal another crime. That was unlawful election interference. And here's how we get to unlawful, not regular election interference, but unlawful interference.
And Jessica, part of the defense's case on this is that you can't trust Michael Cohen, the former lawyer and fixer for Donald Trump for many years, because they say that he perjured himself, that he's a liar. We heard that from the former president. How important is Cohen's testimony to the prosecution's ability to get all of those A plus B equals C?
We're about to find out, in the sense that what the prosecution said is, let's look at everything you heard. It's not just Michael Cohen. He's not the key witness. Let's look at David Pecker. Let's look at Stormy Daniels. Let's look at the evidence, the ledgers themselves. Let's look at what makes sense after the Access Hollywood tapes, before the voting. And what the prosecution is trying to show here is, of course, Michael Cohen's a liar. He is somebody who has huge credibility issues, but does he hear? Because it wouldn't just mean he's lying. It really would mean that there are other parts of this story that similarly would not make sense. Now, for the defense, they're putting Michael Cohen front and center, and we heard that in the defense's closing arguments. Michael Cohen's a liar over and over and over again, and you need Michael Cohen for a conviction. Now, who's right? Again, we'll know when we get that verdict, but I will say the prosecution obviously put forward more witnesses and more evidence than just Michael Cohen.
Right. The prosecution's argument, even without Cohen, they have gone beyond reasonable doubt in the prosecution's mind. Robert, obviously in the defense's mind, the former president continues to maintain that he is not guilty, that this is a witch hunt. Even if the jury was to return a guilty verdict, undoubtedly he would appeal that. What is the implication then for this campaign that is really starting to ramp up for the president of the United States?
A lot would depend on what the specifics were of the sentence. Should Trump end up there with a sentence? Should there be a guilty verdict? For example, if the judge says during the appeals process you don't need to be in home confinement, you don't need to be in jail, then Trump would be able to campaign. But there is a way the judge could specify as part of a sentence that you wouldn't need to remain in confinement even during the appeals process. It's seen widely by legal experts as unlikely. But we're at an uncertain political and legal crossroads. We don't know what the judge would do. We don't know what the jury is going to do. But there is on the horizon the possibility that Trump's schedule, whether it's because of a guilty verdict, an appeal process, or maybe even a new trial. Remember, if there's a hung jury here, there could be a decision by the court to have this trial once again. That has happened before in the legal system when there is a hung jury and they can't come to a consensus. So there's there are many variables right now in the air. And all of that's weighing on the minds of Trump advisors, Trump political allies I've been speaking with. And they really worry that Trump's paying a real cost here in terms of his time. His time, they believe, is being wasted by being here in Lower Manhattan. He's not doing what he needs to do on the campaign trail, but they have no choice. There's an obligation to be here. All
right. The jurors now have those instructions from the judge. They are deliberating. Robert, Errol, and Jessica, thank you all. We'll continue to check in with you on this breaking story throughout the day.